Marco, and today we're going to work on binding skills. Now, I know that most of us enjoy machine embroidery because it doesn't have that hand word in it, but a little handwork can really up the quality of your finishes. And I just want to further convince you that you should try this by just showing you a couple of examples. So today we're just going to bind a simple little mug rug. And first I want to show you that this is a 5x7 all in the hoop mug rug. And you could see that the edges are completely satin stitched. We all love this because you put it in the hoop and you pull it out and it's completely done. But if you just can take an extra 20 minutes, okay, for the same size design, which doesn't have the satin stitch edges, that's this one, you can increase, get a bigger size, add another fun fabric. We all like to use our fabric stash. And, you know, I just think it just adds a little handmade element that really ups the quality of the finish. And you can also, if you really want to make a beautiful art piece, add a much bigger border around the edge and bind. And this, I liked it so much. I added just a little hanger and a charm in the corner. So from a simple like mug rug, you can do something much more spectacular with just a little effort. And as my last ditch effort to convince you to do this, I'm going to say that the entire binding is going to be stitched front and back with the machine. If you want to, you can stitch the back by hand. I know a lot of people just don't like that. Today we're going to focus on just doing everything in the machine. We just released, this is part of our new alphabet cross stitch series, and we just released the Halloween version. So I am really excited to get this done in time to just have it up a couple of weeks before Halloween. So this is the project I'm going to be working on today. So you can see no satin stitch edging. I just hooped and ran the design on a large piece of fabric. So that's really going to give me a lot of flexibility to make this as big as I want. So the things that we'll need is obviously your embroidery stitch out. We're going to need binding and backing fabric. This is a small piece, so I just pull from my stash. You probably even a fat quarter is twice as much as you need for either the binding or the backing. And then we're just going to need a little piece of batting to make it soft. So I have a big stash, and I like to pull out and play with fabric. And these are my top choices here for the binding. And I'm gonna look at this and just kind of go through what goes on in my head when I do pick a binding. So this is a really great color. It's grunge fabric. I love grunge. I also stitched this on grunge though. It's a really beautiful orange. So what I do is I just kind of lay it down and use my hand here to show like a little bit of edging. And this is always going to be like a fabulous but oh so safe choice. So I am going to not use this one because it's just kind of too much like what I have already. Any binding choice that you decide against can be moved into the backing pile. This one I really like because, again, I use green for the background, and when I think of Halloween, I think orange. So I really want to get orange back into it. I like this one because it has like a little bit of texture. My orange pretty much matches exactly this one color of orange here, so that's like a top choice. Then I pulled this one, which has some green and orange in it, and I like that as well. I'm just thinking like between these two, I kind of still like the sunflower one better because these stripey shapes just seem, they're a little too creepy for me when I put my hand here. It just looks a little odd to me, but if, you know, again, it could make up the backing, you know, we'll see. Here's another really fun one. This is very similar to this. It just has like a couple more different oranges in it. And I actually, when I look at this, I think I do like it like a little bit better just because this is more one tone of orange and this has a bunch of oranges in it. It has like, and I did use a dark and a light orange, so that's gonna move into top position. And then I have a lot of Halloween fabrics because I love Halloween. I love it when it's cute and not scary, and I just like this print. I remember buying it at the Vermont Quilt Show, so don't ask me where I put my keys, but I can tell you where all my fabric came from. And I do like this one. My criticism of it as a binding is there's fun, bigger things in it that aren't going to show. And now that I'm talking it through, I think this would make like the perfect backing because I love this print, and the backing will also show up the larger elements here. So we are going to go with this for the binding and this for the backing. And then I do need a little square of batting. So we're ready to start. The first thing we're going to do is trim our piece to size, and however much fabric you want to leave around your piece, it's totally arbitrary. I have left enough around here to almost make this into a small placemat, but I have this little stand in my kitchen that I like to use as a seasonal display. So this was my mug rug series from a couple years ago, and I really like this size to just sit in that little stand. So, and you can see this piece is also quilted, which is a nice look just to put a simple grid on it. But today we're going to focus on binding and not include quilting. So what I do, I can just measure this, and it's like 1 1/4 all around. But if you also just need help envisioning it, you can use your rulers, you can use white paper, whatever you want to kind of find the corners and see how it's going to look. So I'm going to go with 1/4 inch all around. So I don't cut, I always mark. Like I'm going to line this 1/4 inch line up against the outermost piece of embroidery here, and I always draw my lines in first because obviously if you cut it badly there's no going back, or you could just make a smaller piece. But I just find it's better to just spend an extra minute here than to be sorry. So again, I'm measuring 1/4 inch all around, and when I draw this second line, I also kind of line some of these lines up with the line I drew already to make it sure it's going to be square corners. Again, just looking here to make sure we're keeping it square, looking for the outermost line of the embroidery. You can use anything to mark this up because this is all going to be covered with the binding. So sometimes I use those very thin mechanical pencils because it just gives you like a really crisp line. Okay, so there it is, and the best thing you can do now is look at it, because you don't want to look at it after it's bound and see that it's crooked, or you measured 1 1/2 on one side instead of 1 1/4. So that looks good to me, and I'm ready to cut it. It doesn't matter which side you start cutting on. When I do cut long cuts like this, it's always good to like have part of your hand on the ruler but a little part on the piece, because it just gives you a little more stability, and I find it helps from having the ruler slipping. There's also like nice products that I keep getting in my sew sampler box to like stick on the back of these and make them less slippy, but I haven't really found the need of them. So they're still sitting in a drawer. Now, when I cut the next one, I just find it's easier to put my ruler on the line, or my rotary cutter on the line, I'm sorry, and then bring the ruler up to it. And then again, I'm looking here to make sure I'm getting a square corner. Treat yourself to a new rotary cutter blade once in a while, because that can also really prevent an accident. Okay, again, rotary cutter on the line. Sometimes I use my other hand just to steady it a little bit because I'm usually in a state of too much caffeine. Checking here. Okay, so I have now trimmed that up beautifully. Another thing besides handwork that we all hate is math, so there was no reason to really measure anything besides this width. It doesn't matter to me that this is like 10 and 5/8 by 6 and whatever. It's of no consequence. So now we're ready to start binding. So in the name of no math, I could measure this and figure out how much I need, but I really don't like to do that. And I have my fat quarter, which I've kind of starched and iron flat here. So I'm just gonna like eyeball it, and I could see like I'm gonna get to there and around the corner here with one strip. And then if I cut two, it might be a little shy, but I think I'm gonna make it. So I'm just gonna cut 2 strips. I'm not gonna measure around my piece or anything. It's nice to practice binding on small pieces because it's just, you know, it's quick. You know, it's just good practice because I do many of these, and it really helped me up my skill for the big quilts that I do make. All right, so first I'm just going to trim the edge off here. I didn't have my finger on the fabric that time, so you could see it slipped. All right, now we have a nice clean edge, and for this I'm going to use the markings on my mat. And for a mug rug, like a quilter will use a 2.5 inch wide strip, but for a mug rug, I just find that it's a little bit too much, a little too wide. So I do 2.25 inch strips for my mug rugs. You're welcome to do whatever works for you, and this method will work for any width. Okay, there's one. And we're going to go another 1.25. So I feel like, you know, on this long ruler, sometimes I'm really reaching out here, and it did slip a little, but this binding strip is going to be folded in half and then folded in half again. So if I do have one end that's a little longer than the other, it's not going to matter. So. All right, so I do think my 2 pieces are gonna make it all the way around, and the first thing I need to do is connect them. This is a batik, so I know there is a right and a wrong side, but I'm not even gonna take the time to worry about that because they both look pretty close to me. Now we have to join our 2 strips. If you're not using a batik, you wanna have right sides together as you usually do when you're sewing. And I am going to use a ruler to get them at a 45-degree angle. And then when you make your binding strips, think of the letter A, the capital letter A. So here's your outside bars, and then the A has the bar across. Okay, if you sew it this way by mistake, it's not going to work. Okay, then I'm just going to quickly pin that. I usually pin well out of the sewing line because that way I don't have to remove pins as I'm sewing. I don't enjoy sewing, stopping, pulling out pins, and sewing again. All right, I'll just take this over to the sewing machine. All right, so I'm in position, and I'm just going to sew right across that line. So we're sewn across, and now all I do is just trim my 1/4 inch seam. It helps to take the pins out at some point. You kind of have to. So I'm going to take that off, and then I'm just going to take these little corners off. And then we open it it up. And you can see it looks like it's pretty much one continuous piece. So sometimes you can get like a little shifting when you sewed, but this is going to be folded in half and half again, and that type of mistake isn't going to be a problem. So just go easy on yourself. Sometimes I have to tell myself this isn't a show quilt, this is a mug rug, and it's better than a show quilt because this is really going to make some little trick-or-treater happy. Okay, so I'm going to take this over to the ironing board off camera, and I'll just iron the seam open, and then I'm going to press this in half. Okay, I have my binding ready, and now there's the two last pieces of the puzzle are the batting and the backing. And again, I am friends with math, but why do it when you don't have to? This mug rug was cut to a very odd measurement. So all I'm going to do is layer my pieces. This is my big scrap of Halloween fabric, and I think it had an upside and a downside. So my pumpkins are facing that way, and I want them to be that way on the back. So I'm just going to flip this around. I'm putting it face down. I'm making like exactly my quilt sandwich here now. Okay. And then I'm just going to use a few pins here to hold all these pieces together. You can use safety pins for this because these are going to stay in while I'm sewing, but I just use regular pins, and I find if you just sink the point into the middle, so it's not poking out the back, it's in the middle, you're not going to get jabbed every time you hit that. All right, so I'm through, and then I'm just going to poke the end back into the middle. No ouchies. So it's a little piece, so I think four pins are plenty sufficient to hold it. Again, just making sure my seam line is going to be here, and I don't want to hit a pin, so just make sure you pin out of the seam line. Okay, we're pinned, and I'm going to use my long ruler to now just trim everything at once. You can tell I've used this fabric for a few other things as well, so it's turning into a really odd shape. Always put your ruler on your piece, so if your rotary cutter slips for any reason, it's not going to cut into your piece. Think of your ruler as like a guard for your work. And just take your time when you're cutting. There's no rush. We're supposed to be enjoying this, right? All right, easy as pie. We're all trimmed. These pieces are exactly the same all around, no ruler required. All right, so now we're going to retrieve our binding strip, which is pressed, and get at it. Okay, we are ready to go here. And there's just one more thing that I know people always question me about, and I just thought of it, but I did leave my stabilizer in the piece because no one is going to snuggle with this thing, and I just feel like the added stiffness helps me in my upright display method that I want to use. So, all right, so here we have our binding strip. I did check to make sure that it was going to go all the way around. And we have a nice, it's good to have like at least 6 inches of excess on it. So we're set there. The first thing we're going to do is kind of run a test. And this is an important step, so don't skip it. And you can see that I'm using this open foot here, so I can really see what I'm doing. And I can also adjust my needle to the right and to the left, which is what I'm going to need to do to figure out where I want to stitch the seam line. It's not, you can't just do it on the 1/4 inch line. So I'm going to give a good bit of excess here. But then I'm going to start sewing here because we need overlap at the end. And you're going to be really happy to have a lot loose here. You'll see why at the end. It just helps when you're going to connect that's always the hardest part, connecting the strips at the end. So I'm going to start, all the raw edges are together. I'm going to start in the corner and line up my piece with the edge of my foot. I have my needle is in the middle position now, and this is my test. I'm going to just go forward, take a little back stitch just to hold it. And then just do a little bit of sewing here. Okay, now what we're going to do is turn this to the back and see where it overlaps. Okay, for a show quilt, which this is not, remember, I would be finishing this by hand, and I would just want to make sure that this binding just covers the stitching line on the back. This is a machine binding, and we want to make sure that when we stitch through on the front, this back is going to get caught. So my binding is overlapping that stitch line by a good 1/8 of an inch. And I don't have to finish my test here because I'm right where I want to be. But if you do not have enough, you'd want to adjust your needle a little bit this way. Or if you have too much, which I'm not sure you could ever have too much, because you don't want to have pieces when you're done. You don't want to have pieces of your binding that are not stitched down, but you would then move the needle to the left. Okay, so we're ready to do it for real now. I'm just going to stitch over what I already have there, and I'll show you how to do a corner. Okay, again, on bindings, I usually do just take a little back stitch just to hold it. Okay, and I'm going to sew in pretty close to the corner. Okay, and then when I get about 1 inch away, I'm going to stop. I'm then going to take a ruler, and what I'm doing here is drawing a line to show me where the end of the mug rug is, right there. And then from the corner, I'm going to draw a 45-degree angle. And then as I sew up to that, I'm going to stop on that angled line and back stitch. This is how to get really nice corners. Okay, I can go one more stitch, and then I'm going to back it up and just go forward again. And then now I'm taking it off the machine. Okay, now we do that tricky fold thing. And it really, when you're starting, like I have a pretty good eye now, but when you're starting to do this, like use your tools to help you. Like, you know, you want that to be a straight line here. So take a ruler. If you can't judge, oh, is it here? Is it this way? Just take a ruler and it'll help you see where that needs to fold up. Okay, and then I'll just give it a little finger press to hold it. And then we fold down. And you want this to be precisely lined up with the edge of your mug rug. Okay, if it's over, you're going to get a really floppy looking corner. And if it's too tight, your corner is going to be too tight. So just take the time to do that well. In fact, I'm even just going to put a little pin in there to hold it. Okay, everything is looking really good here. So I'm going to put it back in the machine. I start on the piece and then I back off of it for a back stitch. Okay, now my corner's locked in, so I can take the pin out. And I'm continuing, everything's lined up really tightly there, just to make sure this is where I'm looking. Okay, now I'm pretty much like within 1 inch of the end. I'm going to just put my needle down to hold it. Again, take my ruler. This shows me where the edge of the mug rug is. Again, make that 45-degree line. So to be honest, some of these steps now, because I've done this so many times, I don't really have to do anymore, but don't skip this step. This is crucial to getting nice corners. Believe me, I've tried to skip it and they just never come out as nice. Okay, I'm going to sew up to the angle line, one more stitch, go back. Okay, I'm ready to take it off the machine again and do my fold. You have everything folded so nicely, you don't want to let go of it and have it all get out of alignment again. So I will put a pin here. start stitching on the piece and just back off the edge. And then forward we go. Okay, it's time to stop again. Oops, not my 45-degree angle. We're more than halfway. You can see I'm not going to use my ruler anymore. Just, you know, see how yours comes out. You can practice a little bit, and then you're allowed to start cutting some corners to harden the palm. All right, last corner, and again, we're gonna stitch barely, just a little more than the corner here, so we have a lot of loose fabric. Gonna be grateful to have that loose when we go to join our two ends. All right, so I'm only gonna go to like just about here. All right, now I'm really excited to see how my corners came out, and I'm just gonna like kind of test it by doing this, and you could see that's pretty sharp. Okay, now comes the tricky part, and this can be like the biggest struggle that you have, but just power through. These are like well overlapped now. This is like a lot more overlap than I ever thought I would have. So I do want my join to be somewhere in the middle here. So I'm gonna cut this piece back a little bit to here, and I'll just mark where I'm gonna cut it. Again, like use a ruler to get a nice square line. Okay, so I'm gonna cut this off, and then we want these two pieces to overlap by whatever the width of the binding is that we made. So I used 2 1/4. So I'm gonna measure this piece 2 1/4 down from my little mark. So that's how much they will overlap. And then this is gonna get cut off. Okay, so my binding is 2 1/4, and just, I can't emphasize this enough. This measurement is 2 1/4. You want them to overlap by 2 1/4. If you used a quilter's 2.5 inch binding, you want them to overlap by 2.5 inches. So I could see where my marks are, you know, measure twice, cut once, and I'm now just gonna cut my ends off here. Again, I use a ruler to do this. It's not helpful if you have like a floppy cut to get nice, precise work. All right, now I've taken the 4 pins out, and I kind of clipped off my threads just to get a nice clean finish. I even just took a little iron over it so everything's fresh and clean and ready for the last step. So what I'm gonna do first is open up this side and draw a 45-degree line. Make sure this is nice and flat when you do it, right into the corner. Okay, then I'm gonna take my 2 pieces and just put them right sides together. We're not joining them this way, but this just helps get oriented. So let's hold them like this, and then the right side, we're gonna rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. I'm gonna sew right on this line, so I'll pin from this side. And now you can see why you want to sew as little on the edges as possible, because this can be a little cramped to work with. And when I go to the sewing machine, I'm gonna really scrunch my piece up to do a nice job sewing. I'm going to use quite a few pins. So if I just turn it this way now, remember when we joined our strips, we made an A, and you can also see that this is an A here with your sidebars coming out like that, and your line will be straight across. That's how you know you have rotated your pieces correctly. Now we'll go to the sewing machine. We're pinned and ready to go, and it's kind of a matter of just now doing a little wrestling match here to push this in and just get this as flat as possible before we stick it in the machine. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Whenever I bind, I just do a little back stitch at the beginning because it takes a second and it just, things aren't going to come apart. I'm sewing right on my drawn line. Little back stitch at the end. Okay, we're off the machine. It's the moment of truth. Okay, and look how nice that came out. So what I'm gonna do now is just give it a little press. I think this is honestly like came out very nice. Now what can happen is it could be a little baggy, and if you press it you'll clearly see what needs to be done here. But if it's a little baggy, all it means is you need to take a little bit more of a seam. So we're not gonna pick this out, we're just gonna go back and stitch a little bit more on this side so there's more seam taken up. And if it's too tight, you need to do the opposite. And again, we're not going to pick out first, but we're going to come in and to loosen it, take a little less seam. So just stitch a tiny bit on this side of your line. Then you'll have to pick out your original line to let it loosen it up a little bit. So those are the three things that could happen. Just a little too tight, a little too loose, or just right, like the three bears. So I'm going to go just give this an iron now, and then I'll come back and just finish the seam. Okay, before I iron, I'm just going to cut my seam back to 1/4 inch here, and I'm just going to kind of wing it and use scissors because it's going to be difficult just to get a rotary cutter on this thing, and scissors will do the job just fine. So we're going to press our seam open. I'll finger press it first just to give it a head start. Okay, and then I'm going to go over and just give the whole thing a nice press again. I'll come back and finish the seam. Sometimes I just use a stiletto just to kind of help this ease in a little bit so you don't get a bubble as you stitch along. Okay, now I'm gonna iron my binding around to the back. It really helps save stress on your hands, and I also have my cute little ironing board here that I love to use. I'm going to press this right back on all 4 sides. I'm staying out of the corners. You're not going to be able to press the corner nicely at this point. This is just to kind of help get it started going around to the back. Okay. Now I'm going to use a glue stick. You can use pins to do this too, but this is a great time of year to go buy school supplies, and I got this entire thing of 12 for like $1, so basically that'll last a lifetime. And I'm just going to rub it along the edge. So you can actually use regular Elmer's glue for this. The only thing is you want to make sure it's dry before you sew, because obviously it could gum up your machine. So all I'm doing is now folding this back the way I showed in the beginning and making sure it's very evenly 1/8 of an inch over that stitching line. First I'm going to do the sides, and then I'm going to go back and work on my corners. Pop up a little bit as I went around, so what I'm going to do now is just hold this with the iron, and that'll help set the glue and also just stick it back down again. If you do like handwork, just go for it. I mean, there's no more beautiful way to do it. And I'm sure if you've read my blog, you know that I do enjoy sitting down with a needle and thread from time to time. All right, so that looks like it's holding better now. And now I'm going to go back in and work on the corners. I'm going to try to get a little more glue in there. If you look at the front, I think they just came out really nice. So you can be really fussy. See, that's not exactly a 45-degree angle, and I'm willing to fuss with it a little bit, but don't be too hard on yourself. I mean, nobody is going to be displaying this from the back. Okay, that came out nicer now. And I think I actually will just put a little pin in there to hold it for a minute while I do the others. Not looking the best, but I'm just keep pinching, you know, for as long as you have patience for, and it's gonna be nice. There we go. All right, last one. All right, I'm gonna leave my pins in and just give it another one final press. The heat will dry the glue out really quickly, and it helps it just stick better. Also, if you're using Elmer's glue, you're probably going to have to do a lot more ironing to dry it. Okay, I'm admiring my nice corners right now. It just looks great. Okay, last step is the fun step. We're back over at the machine. Okay, for the most invisible finish, I'm gonna stitch right in the ditch there. Some people stitch a little bit on the binding just to make sure they catch the back, but that's why I like to fold it over like a good 1/8 of an inch so you're not gonna miss any places. So I'm gonna just put my needle down and make sure I'm in the ditch there. Okay, and then just take your time and enjoy the process. Okay, as I come into the corner, I'm just going to make sure this pin is out. And then I'm going to try to get my last stitch right in the corner. Sometimes you can just jiggle your piece a little bit, and I use my hand wheel to get it right in there. I'm not back stitching at the corners because this is like finishing now, and I don't want that extra thread in my corners. You really don't want to hop up on the binding, so if you're gonna err to one side, just stitch a little bit into the piece. I'm just using white thread too. You know, under other circumstances, I might take the time to put in a matching green thread or an orange, but I just didn't feel like doing that today. Place where I will just do a tiny back stitch is just at the end to hold all the ends down. All right, we're finished. Okay, here's our impeccable finish. Just main points, don't hop up on your binding when you're stitching around. Get that stitch right in the ditch. I think you see that our corner method of marking the corners with a line has really worked out. They're so sharp, I could hurt myself on them. And of course, the moment we've been waiting for, this is what the back looks like. And you could see, because I worked very slowly and just took my time, used that 1/8 of an inch overlap, my back looks really good as well. All right, here's my finish. I'm really tickled with it. We're well ahead of Halloween, and you know, for an all machine finish, I think it looks great. I think it's going to bring a lot of joy to a little trick-or-treater that I have in mind. So thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments what type of project you might use this for. We have plenty of mug rugs on the website that would look absolutely fabulous using this technique. And I'd love it if you would subscribe and just let me know what kind of content you're interested in seeing in the future. That's all for today, and thanks so much for joining me in my sewing room.